Hello, everyone. Today, we're fortunate to have the founder and CEO of Atlantia Advisors, Antonia Savaria, to join us for a moderated discussion session on how blockchain firms survive and thrive in the COVID-19 crisis. Antonia is an attorney and risk management executive with over 15 years of industry experiences in companies such as Morgan Stanley, KPMG, Focus Financial Partners, and InTrade. She holds a Bachelor of Science from Stony Brook University and a JD from Hofstra University. She founded Atlantia Advisors and serves as the CEO. Atlantia Advisors provides a holistic approach to advise small and mid-sized firms in strategies and compliance, focuses on, in particular, businesses in disruptive technologies such as blockchains and fintech. Now, let me turn the floor to Professor Richard Chen, who is going to lead the discussion with Antonia Savaria. Let's welcome.
Great. All right. Thanks so much, Antonia, for joining us. So our first question is, what are some initial reaction of blockchain firms to respond to the COVID-19 crisis? Have you witnessed any innovative pivot strategies?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me and for having me here at this event, and congratulations to all the winners of the award that was just sent with certificates to all the winners. Very interesting question. I think that this has been a really unprecedented time, and similar to many other industries, the blockchain and crypto industries has also been affected. It really depends though, based on the research and the news that I've been following, it really depends on what part of the blockchain sector the firms are. So to give you a couple of examples. In April, Cointelegraph, and I'm going to refer to my notes here to make sure that I refer to the proper names of the firms. Cointelegraph reported that some of the large blockchain analytics firms reported cutting either budget or their marketing efforts. A couple of them include Elliptic, which cut 30% of its staff in both in the United States and the UK. Chain Analysis, which cut sales and marketing staff, and CipherTrace, which cut employee salaries by 10%. Another big player in the industry called Securitize, which is a blockchain-based security tokenization firm, and I'm sure that the students as well as all the other participants here may have heard, they announced that they're cutting their marketing budget. That was all taking place in April. If we look at the different part of the spectrum in terms of tokenization and new projects, again, we see mixed results. On one hand, a number of projects had to postpone their offerings. One example is Schwazm, and they postponed their initial exchange offering. But there are also some success stories as well. On that side, we see BTSE, which is a crypto exchange, and they reported a successful IEO, and the token sold in less than 4 hours. Another example is Solana, a blockchain project which raised $1.76 million. Now, if we look at the exchanges, we see that generally there has been an increase in both the signups as well as the trading activity. Some examples of exchanges which have reported that are Kraken and Gemini, as well as Bitstamp. One of the reasons perhaps is because because of the lockdown, the social distancing measures, the travel restrictions, a lot of people are staying home, and some have more time to get involved with trading in crypto. Others, out of curiosity, are just exploring this new area for them. So it's been mixed, I would say. It really depends on where the players fall in the overall blockchain ecosystem.
Yeah, seems very interesting. Well, since like the blockchain industry has not been heavily influenced by all those issues, given its virtual nature, are there any related cyber security or data privacy issues or concern that you have witnessed?
So yes, so these two issues are pretty major. Usually when there is a disruptive event or such an unprecedented event as the COVID-19 crisis, there are bad actors as well as fraudsters who want to take advantage of both some companies and also individuals. So there have been cyber crimes on the rise. There have been hacks. In fact, the platform that we're using now for this webinar also was in the news not recently concerning cyber attacks as well. I'm sure that many of us have read that in news articles in general. So why is this happening? And on one hand, I think that because of the unprecedented situation and because a lot of employees were sent home to work remotely, many companies, which are probably outside of the regulatory space, where they had policies and procedures, trainings in place on how to handle remote working, were not prepared. So employees may have ended up using their personal email accounts. They may have been using unsecured devices with unsecured VPN connections. So all of that provides for a lot more exposure to and jeopardizing the transmission of information pertaining to the company business, whether that's confidential information, privileged information, even non-public information, depending on what it may be. So that may be part of the reason, of course, people being taken out of their workplace and having to work remotely. A number of the regulators have actually addressed these cybersecurity attacks. For instance, the FBI reported an increase in fraudulent activity, especially as the government started taking measures with the CARES Act, and the FBI in fact reported that people may be getting solicitations for charitable contributions, or people calling under the pretense to be from the CDC. So that was on the FBI side. The Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, also issued an investor alert concerning cybersecurity fraudulent activity in connection with COVID-19. And just to give some examples of what they listed in the report, fraudulent and registered offerings, which we've seen for a couple of years now, charitable investment scams, as well as community-based investment frauds. To get a little more local in terms of geographically speaking, since we're in New York, the New York State Department of Financial Services, which regulates a number of entities, for instance, that's the regulator responsible for the BIC license regulatory framework, and all of the exchanges that are BIC licensed here in New York. So the DFS also issued a cybersecurity guidance, a cybersecurity awareness guidance. I believe that was in April.
Right.
I think your question.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. You also mentioned a question about data privacy and data security efforts.
Yes.
I think that goes hand in hand with the cybersecurity considerations as well. And particularly with respect to data privacy, now there are a lot more concerns about privacy of individual information. And companies being a lot more responsible to protect the information. And just to give a couple of examples, New York, in the middle of the crisis, was the state that announced in March the law that became effective, the privacy law in New York State became effective in March of this year. It was signed into law about 12 months ago, and it's called the SHIELDS Act, and it stands for Stop Hacks and Improve Electronic Data Security Act. New York is following other jurisdictions in the United States, such as California, which also signed into law a Privacy Act 2 years ago, and that law became effective on January 1st of this year. That's the California Consumer Privacy Act. Then also we have Massachusetts and Colorado in the United States that have similar data privacy acts. And of course, many businesses conduct business overseas. They conduct business and they get access to the personal information of European residents. And in that case, the GDPR, which is the European Privacy Regulation, is being triggered. So data privacy also is connected with cybersecurity, but it also goes deeper into protecting privacy information of the customers of these companies.
Right, these are very important considerations for companies in order to respond in this environment. Any other important things they should think of or be aware of?
So I think that there are a couple of practical considerations that companies that are in the space in general should probably pay a little more close attention to. One of them is BCP plans or business continuity plans. Now, many of the regulated entities, and as I mentioned earlier, the companies that are licensed in New York by the Department of Financial Services, they are required to maintain a compliance program, and as part of that, are required to have policies and procedures in place, and some specifically related to cyber, but others to BCP as well. Some of the other regulated entities, and it really depends on the jurisdiction, but I'm just focusing the discussion now in the US specifically. For instance, other companies that are registered as exchanges or maybe alternative trading systems like ADS firms that are member firms of FINRA. They also need to maintain a BCP plan. So maybe it's a good idea for them to take a closer look at those plans and see if they can amend them in such a way that they can, considerations such as this one that we're going through right now, a pandemic, is reflected in that. In addition, I think that from a contractual perspective, of course, every company is conducting business with a number of other entities, such as third-party service providers or vendors. So perhaps it's a good idea to revisit some of the provisions in these contracts, and specifically provisions related to force majeure. And just to clarify, that includes acts of God or activities such as hurricanes or including pandemic, just to make sure that a pandemic is also included in that provision, as well as maybe insurance provisions in the contracts because of potential litigation.
Great, thanks so much. Those are very helpful. And we have a large number of students who are going to graduate after this semester. What is your career advice for these graduating students especially in this turbulent time?
So this is really unprecedented, and I think that it's very challenging for students to get comfortable with the distance learning, and also a lack of communication with peers and students, with professors. But I really want to encourage the students to stay optimistic, and also encourage them to think of opportunities that may be available out in the workspace, because in many unprecedented events, there are businesses that can develop, businesses that can flourish. Of course, on the other side, there are businesses that can be affected. But in general, be positive, be optimistic, explore opportunities. And I heard the awards related to a hedge fund competition. So there is a lot of opportunities in that space as well for students. So explore, and just, if you don't have clarity on what you want to do just yet, try something that's closely related to the skills that you've developing throughout your academic studies, and you don't know how opportunities will avail themselves.
Great, wonderful. These are very useful and to help our students to navigate this turbulent environment.
Yes.
How about any final thoughts before we open the floor up for Q&As?
Sure, just it's a very unprecedented time. There is a lot of activity in the space, I think. In fact, from a legislative perspective, from a regulatory perspective, there is activity. For instance, just to give you an example, in connection with the stimulus package, two of the bills that were presented in Congress discussed digital dollars. In fact, 30 bills were presented to Congress in relation to crypto or blockchain. So I feel that we're moving in that direction, and there may be other developments from the legislative front. Again, depending on where the players are in the industry, they're affected in a different way. I feel that we need to watch out for opportunities as well.
Yeah, that's a great advice. There's certainly a lot of opportunities, especially when markets are turbulent, when things are changing and evolving.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thanks. Let's open the floor to students and faculty. Any questions?
Faculty members and students, you may submit questions through the chat box, or you may unmute yourself and turn on your video and then ask a question directly. So I'll start with the first question. I usually do. So my question is, I'm particularly interested in the future of the blockchain and fintech industry. Given the current situation that's enforced social distancing, as well as a lot of reliance on technology, right, to communicate. Do you view this actually as an opportunity for the blockchain and fintech industry to accelerate their growth in the near future?
Absolutely, yes. Especially as it relates to digital assets, fintech, and blockchain. Because, I mean, the technology itself is such that allows for that remotely for business to be done. So I think that a lot of companies are already doing that, and a lot of blockchain companies already have different employee units and different business units that are located in different parts of the world. So this decentralization is very important element of that. So I feel that there is a lot more opportunities. And while many employees in the space were used to working remotely, now this has become really the new norm. Everybody, even this webinar, all of the meetings that all of the businesses are conducted now via platforms like this one. Mm-hmm. So there is a lot of opportunity in fintech with a lot more blockchain, I feel, expanding even beyond that in medical, in health, remote learning, as well as we're seeing a lot of students in colleges, universities, and high schools being affected. All schools, basically.
Right. So every crisis comes up with winners and losers, right?
Yes, yes, of course. But I think there's a lot of opportunities now. So students should really be more optimistic and look on the bright side and try to find those opportunities.
That's very helpful for our students. Any questions from the faculty and the students? So there's a question here. Andrew, do you want to talk about the question, or I just read it? So the question from Dr. Andrew Shao is it still a good time to invest or start business related to blockchains? What are the major risks and opportunities now? So Andrew.
Yeah, that's actually my question. I just read it. Yeah, thank you.
Should I answer that, or is that?
Yeah, go ahead and answer. So the question is it a good time to invest in a business or start a business related to blockchain now? What are the risks and the opportunities? Where do you see this?
I think both. I think it's a good time to. I mean, obviously, with markets being fluctuating the way they are, and some of the examples that I gave at the beginning of the discussion, there are some blockchain businesses that are doing very well. Some of the exchanges, as we said, have seen increase in signups and increase in trading volume. Also, it's if there is an original idea, I think that it's the perfect opportune time to start a business in the blockchain space. Absolutely.
And the opportunity cost is low, right, for a lot of people.
Yes, for a lot of people. I think that the other question related to major risks. So I think that maybe one of the risks is on the investor side. Investors may be a little reluctant now because of the economic impact, and people don't see the certainty of 3 months, 6 months from now. Investors may be, as I said, reluctant to invest. Another risk may be a jurisdictional risk or regulatory risk. Depending on where you want to open the business, there's some jurisdictions that are a lot more crypto-friendly, others a lot more difficult. So there is a process of analyzing those against the market that you want to capture. And one of the interesting dilemmas is that a lot of companies want to conduct business in the US, and particularly in New York, because of the access to potentially clients. But on the jurisdictional and regulatory side, it may be more challenging. So these are all risks that somebody who is considering doing a blockchain business needs to examine.
Right. Dr. Dallasy, do you have a question?
Oh, thank you. I don't have a question right now.
Okay. Any other question?
We have another question from this
Students.
Rong Yang. Yep. He's curious about the fundamental worth of cryptocurrencies while it's not manipulated by the government. For example, Bitcoins. Any thoughts?
So what is the question exactly? What is the fundamental worth of cryptocurrency?
Yes.
So the fundamental value of cryptocurrency, does cryptocurrency have fundamental value from your perspective?
Well, I think that because crypto is, distributed ledger technology or blockchain is one of the reasons that crypto is so successful, because of its transparency, the immutability of data, traceability, and interoperability. I mean, these are all the positives, right? It's a more decentralized approach. Now, that has been the objections. These are some of the objections, the decentralized approach of some of the more established players in the space. But I feel that we're moving in the direction of crypto. And just to give you an example, this is the time when a lot of events normally in the blockchain space were starting to take place, Consensus being one of them. Fortunately for Consensus, they were able to pull that off and make it a digital virtual event. Other events, such as the Ethereum conference, which is another major event, I believe it was supposed to take place in Vienna this year. They had to cancel that. But during Consensus, something that really resonated with me was Brian Brooks, who became a couple of months ago the Chief Operating Officer of the Office of the Controller of the Currency, which is the national banks regulator. He was part of this panel, and he was discussing crypto. He said that crypto looks like banking for the 21st century. Now, he comes from Coinbase, where I believe he was heading legal. So to have somebody in such an important regulatory agency position who is very crypto, so in support of crypto is very essential. So I feel that we're going to be seeing from a regulatory side, as well as from the legislative side, a lot more developments.
Mm-hmm. Sounds great. Any more questions? Richard, I think that's all.
Right.
Oh, one more question. We saw there's another question. Regulations of many other countries could have great impact on crypto trading. Are you concerned about the regulatory risk, and how should we manage that as investors?
That's a very good question as well. I think that I briefly mentioned that one of the risks that a company needs to examine is exactly that, the regulatory risk. And also regulatory based on the jurisdiction where the business is set up. Now, there are a lot of crypto-friendly jurisdictions, like Switzerland is one of the leading ones in Europe, but there are also a lot of smaller jurisdictions like Malta, for instance, Gibraltar, Bermuda, that are developing a lot more friendly crypto frameworks in an effort to attract business and capital. And a lot of companies are taking advantage of that. To give you an example, when New York in 2015, the Department of Financial Services implemented the BIT license, the regulatory framework for the BIT license. There was something called the BIT exodus, because a lot of the exchanges, the crypto exchanges, were forced to leave New York State as they were unable to meet the regulatory requirements, including maintaining a compliance program and the whole application process, which was very burdensome and still is very burdensome. So yes, it really depends on the jurisdiction. In some cases, I was in Malta about a year and a half ago during their blockchain conference, which was actually organized by the government, and the government had presence on the floor, and they had booths and were able to discuss the three parts of the legislation that they had put together with some of the attendees. So it's a very interesting approach. But again, one of the other considerations is who are the clients that, as a business in the crypto space, you're looking to attract.
Right, I agree. So there's a lot of competition across states as well as across countries, right, to attract this new business, new technology. So it's a risk as well as opportunities. Any more questions? Richard, I think
Great.
that's all. Thank you so
thanks
much,
so much,
Antonia.
Much appreciated.
Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Take care. We'll be in touch.
Cheers.